Graf, donc vous êtes président de la Gambling Commission.
Philip Graf, you are the Gambling Commission's chairman, the equivalent to the British Arjel, to the French Arjel. So you have a lot of experience. Could you talk about the experiences made by the Gambling Commission in order to fight against addiction, minors gambling and illegal gambling? You have the floor.
Mesdames, Messieurs, bonjour.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My French is not up to it, so I have to speak in English. Sorry about that.
Indeed, for inviting me. It's a pleasure and it's a privilege to be here. Let me first of all set the context, if I may, for the role of the Gambling Commission, which is the regulatory body which regulates and governs all gambling activity in Great Britain. This embraces arcades, gaming machines, betting, lotteries, bingo, remote gambling, online and mobile gambling, and also gambling software. We're also responsible for licensing a commercial operator who runs our national lottery. Now, whilst we have regulated and licensed remote gambling since 2007, we switched last year from point of supply to point of consumption basis for licensing, which reinforces our ability to insist on responsible gambling provision and to combat illegal activity. So my 10 minutes this morning, I'm going to focus, as requested, on our approach to social responsibility and to dealing with illegal activity. Now, in Great Britain, as in many jurisdictions, gambling is recognised by the public policy framework as a mainstream leisure activity. As such, we have a duty to permit gambling within the legislative, regulatory and social framework which exists. In practice, this means that we must permit gambling where it is consistent with achieving 3 licensing objectives set out in the legislation. The objectives are to keep crime out of gambling, to ensure that gambling is conducted in a fair and open way, and to protect children and other vulnerable persons from being harmed or exploited by gambling. Now, it's worth reminding ourselves that the majority of people in Great Britain enjoy gambling safely and without harming themselves or others. But of course, there are those who gambling does cause harm to. Our role is to balance the costs and effectiveness of regulation with the right of individuals to enjoy gambling, whilst at the same time ensuring that measures are in place to protect those at risk of harm through their gambling habits. Public acceptance of the growth and innovation in gambling, its social license, if you like, depends on demonstrating that as far as possible, commercial success is built on money coming from normal leisure gamblers who choose to spend money that they can afford to lose. And this means that the industry has to minimise so far as possible the income it receives from gamblers who have difficulty controlling their gambling, from criminals and from the black economy. Gambling-related harm is gambling that disrupts or damages personal, financial or recreational pursuits. It's associated with a range of health and social problems that potentially have an impact on public health, debt counselling and court services. What is needed is a regulatory approach that is effective in persuading operators to play their part in minimising gambling-related harm. And we have adopted a risk and outcomes-based approach to regulation. It's not prescriptive, it's not a tick-box exercise. We expect operators to take responsibilities for their business, and we hold to account, by means of personal management licenses, senior people within those businesses. That means those personal management licenses, without them, they cannot work in the industry. And the people we hold to account include the most senior marketing executives. Our risk-based approach means we focus much of our effort on those operators with the greatest impact, with smaller operators subject to proportionately less regulatory oversight. All operators are subject to our licence conditions and codes of practice, which set out the broad requirements we place on operators. And earlier this year, we significantly strengthened these in the area of social responsibility and clarified the leading role that operators themselves must take. We particularly focused on areas such as the effective supervision of customers on gambling premises, test purchasing, self-exclusion, and marketing and advertising. But perhaps the most significant change was that we introduced a new requirement for our largest operators, about 40 in all, who represent 80% of our market, to each submit an annual assurance statement signed off at board level. The purpose of the annual assurance statement is to improve board level, the owners, the chairs of organisations, the CEOs and other board members focus on and accountability for achieving the licensing objectives. It's intended to be a relatively concise self-assessment of the risks to the licensing objectives posed by the business, how well the operator is managing those risks, where it needs to improve, and how it intends to do so. Amongst other things, we expect an operator to demonstrate within their statement that they have taken measures to identify and tackle at-risk and problem gambling, and to evaluate their progress in mitigating the risks. We expect a narrative assessment of the impact of each operator's actions on the extent to which its revenues are likely to come from at-risk and problem gambling, using proxy indicators wherever possible. The narrative should give a sense of the scale of impact. Now, this should actually require relatively little additional effort from operators already putting socially responsible provision of gambling at the centre of their thinking, but it should force others, in particular boards and key executives, to give social responsibility the attention it needs. Illegal gambling is wrong, but it also unfairly competes with and undercuts the efforts of those responsible operators trying to maintain high standards. So illegal gambling, as I say, is wrong, and it unfairly competes with and undercuts the efforts of those responsible operators trying to maintain high standards. The 1st of November this year marks the first anniversary of a change in UK legislation that required all gambling operators offering services in Great Britain to be licensed by the Commission. Now, we're focused here on the rapid identification of possible illegal activity. Sometimes a sanction is required, but we also believe that interventions such as directly confronting offenders, public warnings, removing hosting activities, disrupting payment and advertising arrangements are effective in both tackling the activities and minimising harm. Operating in a global digital environment, of course, poses challenges to both our intelligence and our investigation methods. But we're constantly looking to improve effectiveness in this environment, as well as ensuring that we use our powers to access communication data appropriately, and we work closely with other national and international agencies with an interest in combating cyber-related crime. So we've bolstered our regulatory framework in a number of ways. We have required business-to-business network and platform providers, which need our licenses, and our business-to-consumer licensees to use only commission-licensed software suppliers, thereby deterring the latter from also supplying illegal operators competing in the British market. We have strengthened our capacity to deter, disrupt, and if necessary, take regulatory or criminal enforcement action by taking on more technical and expert staff. We have improved and streamlined the way we work with payment providers and with those who carry marketing and advertising, introducing a commission kite mark to make it easier for third-party contractors and consumers to distinguish legal from illegal operators. And we're putting more resources into warning consumers of the risk of dealing with illegal suppliers. And finally, we've developed closer working relationship with other law enforcement bodies and with tax authorities, as well as with fellow gambling regulators. It's worth mentioning at this point the significant payment providers such as Visa, MasterCard and PayPal, all of whom have agreed arrangements in place for terminating bank agreements with those operating illegally. And we've also been encouraging banks to check the license status before taking on a gambling operator as a client. Others, such as Google, Facebook and Microsoft, for example, have also put in place arrangements to check license status before taking on new customers. All this seems to be working well. But the main tools, of course, to keep a black market minimal are already in place in the form of an attractive, permissive legal market, allowing a wide range of products with, compared to many other jurisdictions, relatively little hardwired prescription or regulatory burdens such as real-time data submission or heavy license and compliance fees. The open market helps to minimize illegal activity, but will only survive if industry is committed to tackling gambling-related harm and illegal activity. Now, money laundering is a key area of focus for keeping crime out of gambling. We want to make sure that operators have effective controls to prevent gambling being used to launder money. Money laundering is, of course, not unique to gambling, and we work very closely with other organisations, such as our National Crime Agency and Her Majesty's Treasury, to ensure that we fully understand the risks and any emerging trends in the area. We have the power to review the performance of licensees against the terms of our enforcement policies. These powers include issuing warnings, attaching conditions to a licence, revoking a licence, and imposing a financial penalty. We also encourage regulatory settlements. This is where an operator themselves take responsibility for suggesting how it can compensate for licence breaches. So let me give you, if I may, a flavour of two very different recent cases, one involving enforcement action against an illegal operator, and one where a licensed operator had inadequate controls to prevent money laundering. The first is at the lower end of the scale. It involves an individual previously licensed by the Commission, but no longer holding a licence, who re-established himself as an illegal bookmaker. Members of the public reported them to us. We took warrants out for his arrest, and working with the police, seized his equipment and closed down his operation. He is currently awaiting sentencing by the courts. The second, more recent example involves a leading UK operator, the Rank organisation. The Rank organisation has an overall group turnover of over €1 billion, 1.03 billion euros. Now, following an in-depth investigation of weaknesses in its anti-money laundering controls at its casinos, we agreed a range of sanctions. These included a third-party audit of its revised AML arrangements and the surrender of over $1 billion of profits, 1.3 billion euros of profits that resulted from these 1.3 million of profits, beg your pardon. We weren't going to put them completely out of business, pardon me, 1.3 million euros of profits, which resulted from these shortcomings to be spent for agreed socially responsible purposes. So two very different approaches, and the voluntary settlements are quite an important part of our toolkit at present. So in summary, we in Great Britain are certainly not complacent about social responsibility or illegal activity. There has been some progress, but we know there's more to do. Industry is waking up to the high level of public concern at gambling. The amount of advertising, media reports on debt, and social media have all fueled this public concern, which in turn will influence politicians and the policy framework for gambling in Great Britain. I spoke earlier how public tolerance for gambling and growth in gambling will only be sustained if commercial success is based on money from gamblers who can afford it, as opposed to money coming from gamblers who have difficulty controlling their gambling, or from criminals, or from the black economy. Society, not the Gambling Commission as the regulator, must decide where in the spectrum of freedom and control it wants gambling to be. We can help inform that process by advising on the impact of gambling and the likely consequences of policy changes. But how far the state should limit exposure or access to different types of gambling is currently a matter of considerable public interest. And there are inevitably trade-offs in any positioning of any country's approach to gambling regulation. Society may well opt for more cautious measures if the industry is not seen to be proactive in helping to reduce gambling harm. In Great Britain, industry has to choose between two paths: to take control of the situation, putting social responsibility and the prevention of illegal activity high on its agenda, or to have more rigorous regulation and legislation imposed upon it, with greater controls on products and its ability to innovate. I hope and expect it will choose the first path. Thank you very much indeed.